Hey guys, thanks for joining us. The Tap Cancer Out BJJ Open is heading to 14 cities this year, including Baltimore, Maryland on June 15th and Charlotte, North Carolina on June 22nd. Registration is open for both of those, so please join us. We'll also be heading all over the East Coast and Midwest, so head to tapcancerout.org to see our full schedule. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at tapcancerout and this podcast at Rolling for a Reason podcast. If you want to pick up any of our gear, you can grab gis, rash guards, hoodies, tees, hats, patches, and a whole lot more at store.tapcancerout.org, or you can just head to our website and click the store link in the upper right. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Please leave a rating, review, or comment to let us know what you think. Welcome to the Rolling for a Reason podcast, episode number 4. I'm your host, John Thomas, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host and undefeated fight-to-win competitor, Dave Bannon.
I do like that.
Okay, I told you were going to like it.
1-0, perfect record. Got to retire.
As am I. Together, we are both undefeated.
2-0.
2-0.
Perfect record.
Yes. You enjoy. I think we've talked about your fight to win on another episode, didn't we?
Probably.
You like to talk about it a lot. But it was a fun experience. Those guys
really
do an amazing job at that whole model.
That was like most fun I've had doing Jiu-Jitsu probably ever.
Right. And it's interesting. I'm not going to give it away, but we have a good guest, and it's going to be along the same lines. But what they've done in another sport, Fight to Win has done some really interesting things for the sport of jiu-jitsu, and historically it was always the quote-unquote super fights had to be big names, and so all of Naga and Grappler's Quest and everything, they would get these guys that you have heard of, but it would just be one fight, but they really have put amateur competitors on a pedestal and give them an experience that they can almost not get anywhere else. And it was an incredible amount of fun for me. I mean, hindsight's 2020. I won my fight, so now it's like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have had as much fun if I lost.
I don't know how fondly I would have looked back on it. Hopefully I would have, because it was very cool. And like in any other job, you can't, walk into if you work at a bank, you don't get to walk in to intro music and pyrotechnics and smoke and stuff. Yeah, so it was pretty cool. Not that jiu-jitsu is our job, but still, you don't get that many opportunities to make an entrance like that. So the Rolling for a Reason podcast shines a light on the individuals in BJJ, MMA, and beyond that are making the world a better place. And we are excited in this episode to be joined by the founder of Haymakers for Hope, or a co-founder rather, Andrew Myerson. He's also a Tap Cancer Out board member, in full disclosure. So really happy to cross these paths and have you on our podcast. So welcome, Andrew.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing great.
I'm great.
So before we get into Haymakers for Hope, which the BJJ community might not be familiar with, but I know the boxing community definitely is, we always like to learn about the person that we have on the podcast and their origin story. So every story starts at the beginning. So what's the beginning for you, Andrew? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? All of that good stuff.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Dover, Mass. My parents moved there in like 1980. I lived in the same house my entire life. I went to college out in Pittsburgh, and then worked at a bank in Boston for like a year before getting a job at Goldman Sachs in New York City. Worked at Goldman Sachs for about almost 5 years. Had started Haymakers while I was there, and then decided to do it as a volunteer thing. I had the first like actual event, and was very compelled to do it full time. I kind of told myself that I couldn't do 2 full-time jobs at the same time, which I'm sure is something that a lot of people say.
Yes.
And then I realized, so I left the firm, and then I realized that I continued to make the same mistake for the next 5 years. So I did an MBA at MIT Sloan. I started working in venture capital. I started another venture-backed company, or a venture-backed company with the VCs that I was working with. At the end of 2016, realized that I was the bottleneck that was holding everything back. And on top of, growing a family and stuff like that. So I, kind of had to make a gut check decision on where I wanted to spend like all my time and do what I had said I was going to do 5 to 6 years prior. And I chose to continue to build and grow Haymakers. And, at that point we were raising about $1.5 million a year. Now we're raising $3 to $4 million a year and continuing to grow pretty significantly.
So, but you were a boxer for a minute there, right?
I actually did MMA before boxing.
Really?
Yeah. So I got involved when I grew up in Dover, which if you're a hardcore local MMA fan, you know that Kenny Florian is
Yes,
also from Dover.
indeed.
And I grew up with Kenny's younger brother, Kirk. But because all the brothers were super close, so I knew Keith and Kenny very well. And and then I started working out with Kenny and Steve Whittier. Do you know Steve?
I do not.
Okay, so Steve, he's friends with John Connors. So
Mm-hmm.
Steve does a lot of the Matt Thornton stuff, the Straight Blast Gym stuff on
Yep.
the East Coast. So I started doing MMA stuff. I started with working with Mark Delgrade and all of those guys. And then when I moved to New York, there were no MMA gyms at the time downtown. The closest one was the Gracie Gym Midtown. But as some of you know, when you are in a job that you're working 80 plus hours a week, I don't think I went to Midtown for like 2 years.
Right.
So there was a boxing gym right by the office. So I just started boxing, and started competing. I started doing basically these what they called charity events, and this is all pre Lehman Brothers falling. So back then they had these things like Trader Monthly and all these like stupid publications that were, geared towards like yachts and cigars and, like excess lifestyle stuff. So I did a couple of those events, and then realized very quickly that the money that was raised was actually not really going to charity. I think they like to call it a charity event. They technically had to give like 10% of the revenue back to charity, but and not that gave me the idea for Haymakers at the time. It just left a really bad taste in my mouth, and with nothing really to do about it. I was just like I was kind of pissed off about it.
Right.
But kind of went along, and I had met a friend, a woman actually, who was a cancer survivor. She's from Dedham, Mass, and she picked up boxing when she was like 25 after beating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And basically, she beat it, and then she was like, "Well, I want to get back in some way, and the only way that I know how is to run marathons because that's what people did." She is an incredible athlete, but hates endurance stuff, as I'm sure a lot of us do.
Right.
But basically, so she started boxing. She won the New York City Golden Gloves in 2009, like 3 to 4 years after picking up boxing gloves for the first time, which is pretty incredible,
Yeah,
especially
cool.
in New York City. In 2010, she asked me, she was like, "Hey, do you want to train for the gloves also?" And I said, "Sure." But when I started to think about it, I had a lot of friends at the time who were running marathons because, with endurance events and like the way that the New York Marathon or the Boston Marathon are kind of set up is you buy a bib, right? Unless you're an insane runner, you qualify at like a sub 3 hour marathon level, you're buying a bib. And basically you're pledging to raise a certain amount of money for a certain cause. But really, like the idea is that you kind of want to do this, and this is kind of the entry fee to do so. So, what I realized was you felt like you have to donate, right? It's like, oh, so and so's running the marathon, I'll give $50, and the firm will match at 50. So like everyone gets $100, everyone's happy. And what I realized was there was like two things. One, there was no there was really no follow up. So it was never like, hey Andrew, thanks so much for the donation. Because of the support of you and like 100 other people or 200 other people, I was able to raise a certain amount of money, and this means a certain thing to me. And because of your generous support and everyone else's, I was able to continue to get up at 5 a.m. every day to, put in the miles, to put in the work to reach my goal of running it like, 4 hours, 3:30, 3 hours, whatever it was.
Right.
You never had that, right? And so then when you think about the motivation of the donor, it really has nothing to do with the outcome, which is kind of interesting, right? You're like, it has nothing to do with the outcome. It really has to do with helping them through the training, which is long, it's arduous, and it's lonely. And I think, this is where boxing and MMA and even jiu-jitsu are very similar, is that the training timeline for all of this is very similar, right? So
Yeah.
we were putting in like, hardcore, like 4 months of training, 4 to 6 months of training for a certain competition, right? And the Golden Gloves happen to be like, one of those ones where if you win, you get to fight the next week and things like that. And I know with, jiu-jitsu, it's a lot in one day, but you do prepare yourself for that one day. And so I said that to myself, that if people are fundraising for their marathon training, why don't I see if we can fundraise for our boxing training? And then the joke that I kind of tell is that I vastly underestimated how much my friends wanted to see me get punched in the face.
Yeah.
Because like, I worked on this like massive floor with a lot of, very type A dudes and women. And like, I think it was like within 30 minutes, I'd raised $5,000. It was like, holy
That's
shit. Like,
crazy.
Wow.
and then it just kept on snowballing after that. And, a lot of people came to fights and stuff like that. But then what I noticed, and I'm sure you guys noticed this too, is with each successive fight, I raised significantly less money, right? And I kind of equate it to like when you have a friend that's in a band, everyone goes to their first shitty show,
Yes.
right? Everyone goes to that like divey club at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, pay a $20 cover, have warm beer, and they play 3 songs, and you're like, wait, that's it? And they're like, yeah, dude, it's so cool. And you're like, okay, great. Oh, that was awesome. I'm never doing that again. But I supported them, right? And that's what you were there for. And I would say that if nobody watches professional boxing, then let's be honest, like not many people really do anymore. I'm sure the people at the Zone don't believe that, but whatever.
Yeah.
Nobody watches professional boxing, so why would they watch amateur boxing unless there's a novelty or a tie? And I think what those guys that you were describing in the beginning, keyed into with jiu-jitsu is it has nothing to do with the name. Like nobody cares about these people anymore, right? Nobody cares. And what's so cool about like CrossFit is the proliferation of the everyday athlete, and same with running, right? Like these like regular everyday people are now celebrities. And what we kind of without really thinking about this, like what we kind of tapped into was that same idea, was that and what was cool with boxing, and one of the things we did was you can only do this once, and you can only it has to be your first fight. So we don't want people who have multiple fights. We just want people, this is their first time they've ever done this, and preferably they've never picked up gloves before, because what we were really able to see was that over time, a 4-month training program, if you get 2 people who are of similar athletic ability, similar size, and they're going to put the similar amount of time in, the arcs of their training will be very similar over 4 months. And then you can actually have very fair matches. And so what's cool for people is, boxing is the sweet science, right? So you're getting in incredible shape, which is awesome, but you're also learning a new sport, which for someone in their 30s and 40s, and this is why I think jiu-jitsu has become so popular also, you can learn a new sport. You can learn a new skill. And, there's something about that makes it more than just like, oh, wow, I shaved off 30 seconds off my run today.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of opportunities for you to
No, like
that age to start learning.
Not many sports really available.
Right. So like if I said to you guys, all right, guys, I didn't grow up skating, but I really want to join a men's hockey league in Boston or in New York City, or let's say in Boston, right? Because that's where I'm located.
Yep.
And I can get a private coach. I could go and do lessons every single day. I could get markedly better, right? But in like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours law, like if I join that men's league, I'm going to get my fucking ass kicked
Yes.
Yeah.
because you have guys that have been playing since they were 4
Mhm.
or, or 2 since they were, skating since they were 2. And, they played at BU, they played at Northeastern, they may have had a cup of coffee like in the pros. And they're just like, there's no amount of time that I can put in that I will catch up.
Right.
But with, with these combat sports that people didn't grow up doing, you can. And that's what makes it really cool, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of an equal playing field. Of course, in jiu-jitsu, we're seeing it start to age down grossly and seeing a lot
Oh,
of,
sure.
the top competitors were the ones that started at 4 years old. And so,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where boxing, you don't really have that as much, or at least in the white collar world. I just don't think that boxing has, at that young age, has penetrated suburban youth
Yeah, I don't think
as much as jiu-jitsu has.
most parents want their kid boxing when they're 4 or 5 years old.
No, I don't know why. They're cool with karate, but they're not cool with boxing.
yeah, well, that's the biggest frustration. Even like
And they're
when
cool
we're
with Pee-wee. They're cool with Pee-wee
right,
football, but they're not cool with boxing. So whatever.
right, and
Another
even
conversation for another time.
with us booking venues, like we've had venues straight up say like, jiu-jitsu is just not something we want to have here. Meanwhile, they'll have a karate tournament, no problem. Or, high schools have not gym,
Wrestling
have
teams,
wrestling
yeah.
teams and stuff. Yeah, but it's, but
Well, that's actually funny. So, like on that point, when we started Haymakers, when I sold Joy, I was like, I need to set up a fundraising page, and it actually took me. So this is before GoFundMe,
Mhm.
before CrowdRise, before it was easy just to set up a fundraising page. I had to reach out to we did it for cancer research because Julie had cancer, and I one of my really good friends that I grew up with died when we were 21. So it was just something that I thought was, it affected everybody, and it could be
Mhm.
something that would mean something to everybody. And so when I reached out to a bunch of different cancer centers, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I don't want any money. I just want you to set me up a fundraising page, and the money can go right to you,
Yep.
100% of it. And I got a lot of no's.
Really?
And yeah, because they were like, I don't, boxing, we don't want to be associated with boxing. There's
Mhm.
head trauma, like all this kind of stuff. And, when you start writing $100,000 checks, then all of a sudden those concerns go away very
Funny how
quickly.
that happens. Yes.
You know?
Yeah, it was very difficult for us to find our first beneficiary, and eventually I had to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society Connecticut chapter was literally on the same street as the agency that I worked at, and so I just went there and was like, "Listen, I want to give you money. Will you take it?" And they're like, "Yeah." But up until then, I was sending emails and calling, and it was just it was hard. It was hard to
Oh,
explain what
we'll take it, but you can't say what it's for.
right.
So it's like it's like mob money. You're like, great, like I'm a drug dealer now.
Exactly. So explain to our listeners sort of what the Haymakers for Hope model is,
Program.
what an event
Yeah.
looks like, and because it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, so basically we take regular everyday people, and I say that with a asterisk because anybody who's willing to say, like, just see something and say, yeah, I'm going to
Hmm.
sign up. I've never boxed before. I'm going to have my first fight in 4 months. They have a screw loose, right?
Yeah.
They're a little weird. So I wouldn't say they're regular, normal, everyday people, but for the sake of, appearances, they're regular, everyday, normal people, from all walks of life. And we try to match them with someone of similar attributes, a similar size, age, weight, skill level. And because boxing has become more of like a hip fitness tool, we do have more and more people who have, at least put on gloves and done bags classes and all that kind of stuff. Not that helps you or anything like that in a fight, but they're at least like, familiar with, what a boxing glove
Yeah,
looks like
thrown
at
a punch
least.
before.
Yeah, which can be a hindrance because they have been doing it wrong, and the more muscle memory you build up. Anyway, side note, like if you give a woman with same athletic ability as a man 4 months to train, the woman actually gets better than gets to be a better technical boxer than the man does on most occasions, because they actually want to learn and they don't think they know how to throw a punch.
Right.
But anyway, so we give these people and I call this a win-win-win, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to give people this awesome experience of like a real professional like training camp over a 4-month period of time. We're trying to raise money for a cause that is meaningful to the people that are fighting and the people that are donating. And then the third win is what I noticed when I was in New York at a boxing gym, and even at BJJ gyms very early on. This is like in the mid 2000s. They didn't necessarily know how to attract like the me's of the world, right? The people at Goldman Sachs, the people at like the very like white collar type people who could very much afford the services that they had, and in some cases they were underpricing their services for us. And so for me, I was like, I had a lot of friends who were also like type A athletic guys and girls who were like, I would love to see what I can do in the ring one time, but how do I get started? And so like the third win was that we could help to like be a lead gen for these gyms to bring them more people, because if we were getting 1,000 or 2,000 people at an event, that doesn't mean that all those people want to fight, but a large majority of them want to get in shape and want to get in shape like their buddy. And then they can see like, oh, well, he or she had a lot of fun doing it through boxing, so I'd love to like at least join the gym.
So how do you go about recruiting these people or getting them to apply?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was all word of mouth. We also weren't very savvy on social media. I was also working at Goldman. I think I barely had a social presence because we just weren't allowed to have that. Also, if you Google Andrew Myerson, New York Times, you'll see that I had an article written about me during a fight that got me in a little bit of trouble with the firm. So I had to keep a little bit of a low profile. So another story
Yes.
for beers.
Yeah, exactly.
But so basically it was all word. It was like, my personal network, we had a couple different people who were, very early on who were like, willing to share it for us and stuff like that. Twitter was like a thing back then. And so we had a couple like, we targeted a few people that would tweet about it, a couple like newsletters that did it. And then now, in cities that we have we have built up a following in, we have like, upwards of 300 people sign up for 30 spots. And in new markets, because of the alumni community that we have, in our network and, some savvy social media targeting, we're able to find the people that way. But a lot of it, to be honest, is word of mouth.
So we had our first taste of sort of putting together a fight card. I mean, our traditional tournaments are, just sign up and we'll put you in your bracket and that's that. But we recently had our Black Belt showcase and experienced the joy of matching people. And like, is there any difficulty? I mean, I guess everyone's starting from scratch and it's like the other person's going to be a beginner anyway. So just like get me close in weight and age. And
yeah. But people aren't always like 100% honest about like their prior athletic ability and their prior athletic experiences and maybe even their boxing experiences to some extent. So we have had like, some issues with that. Like, this wasn't a problem because it was two buddies that wanted to fight each other, but like one of the guys got way better than the other one. And we come to find out like afterwards, well, he played Division I football. And we were like, oh, I mean, they're in their 40s, like they're, so like there's no like way to Google that, right? Because it's like he was like a replacement level player at like, a pretty legit Division I program. But we're like, that would have been useful for us to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Solid athletic background
when matching you. But it also it becomes difficult because people, just because you like, for example, like if I said to you guys like, oh, like Marines actually have a sub 500 record for our fights.
Really?
So like Marines actually don't do that. It doesn't correlate.
Yeah.
Or like we had a guy once that was a 2-time Olympic heavyweight rower. And he just couldn't figure out how to convert like those like tree trunk of legs into power.
Right.
And so he got beaten up by a guy who like hit the best athletic experience he had was playing like Division III NESCAC football.
So they're also selling. Are they selling tickets to the events too? I mean, look,
Yeah. So
you're
so in
one
essence,
sold.
they become
They're
their,
selling out
yeah.
now.
And
So
yeah, so
it's
in essence, they're their own promoters,
right.
right? So they have two different ways to raise money. So they can raise money primarily through, they can raise money through ticket sales to the event and through online solicitation of donations. And the way philanthropically it works is 100% of the money that they raise online goes right to where they want it to go. So I believe if you're getting punched in the face for something, you should have some saying where the
Right.
money's going. And you should have, like, you're doing this obviously for a reason, so you should have some idea of why you want to do this. And I think that the motivation of the two different donors is very, very different. So the donors that are giving online are saying, hey, John, I live in California. Let's say I'm Pat. I live in California. Pat's another board member of ours who's one of John's friends, for those who don't know Pat. Um, I live in San Diego. I can't make it to your fight, but I really, believe in what you're doing. I love the cause that you're talking about. And here's $100, $500, $1,000. And, that donor is expecting a majority of that money to go to that cause. And so we just say it's 100%,
Yes.
with fees, 100%. And then the motivation of the people coming to the event is mostly entertainment value, and maybe they're paying a slight premium for it to be a nonprofit event, but for the most part, like, we do it up, like, we do these intro videos, and it's at a fancy venue, and it's really fun, and it's awesome. And so, for those people, it's entertainment value. And so, like I said, philanthropically, the way it works is 100% of the money that's raised online goes right to where you want it to go, and then the money that's raised through the event goes towards paying for the event, paying for our team, our staff, and then anything left over goes into a philanthropic investment fund, which right now we are using to fund our first research project with a researcher at Mass General Hospital in Harvard. And basically what we found is that the 4-month boxing training program could be a very transformative experience for the people going through it. And the fight is really the capstone of that. And so we are trying to give the experience, like the boxing experience, the training camp experience, to people who have gone through chemotherapy. The idea there is that a lot of times after chemo, what you don't really hear about is that people get grossly out of shape because they actually gain weight during treatment. They get really tired. They have to go back to their lives, and then they get depressed, and they don't want to work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, a big problem with, not only do you get cancer maybe at a young age, is the reoccurrence of cancer. You're at a much greater likelihood if you are, if you're out of shape. And so the idea here is to help people become happier, healthier, and in better shape and losing weight.
So how do you set them up with the gyms that they're going to be training at?
So we, in any city that we do these in, we have someone on the ground who has some knowledge of, like, the local boxing scene, and we reach out to all the gyms prior to. We tried doing it electronically in the beginning, and that did not work very well. And so realized that the gyms are still the types of places that you kind of have to go in person and tell them what you're doing and tell them why it makes sense for them and why they should be a part of it. And I honestly now, because, like, we do have, like, a decent following on Instagram, we do have people kind of, like, reaching out to us that are gyms, and we have, like, people reaching out to our info box and stuff like that. But for the majority, it's us going in and saying, like, hey, this is what we do. Here's the program. Here's how it makes sense for you. And, like, would you want to be a part of this?
So some of these fundraisers do an incredible job of fundraising, like
Yes, they do
over
an amazing job.
$50,000. I mean, some of these numbers are
Yeah, we had
staggering.
110 guy this year in New York.
That's crazy.
So other than having wealthy friends, like, what are some of the aspects of these fundraisers that make them an outlier? Have you noticed anything, or is it just being well connected, or
Mob money, yeah.
something? Yeah.
No, I mean, I think. Look, I mean, I think that part of it is corporate, like having corporate ties. Like
Mm.
if, I think that we always do these on weeknights so that it can be kind of like a client event for people. We have a really big tie to like the finance community, and other different, tech industries and things like that, where, they do value like different kind of client events and just like team building community events. But I think that, I think having a story, I think really honestly, like, making it so that like we put a lot of work into trying to help the fighters craft their own story and help them story tell about why they're doing this. And this isn't just like a marathon. I think that the novelty of it being a fight is, and the kind of parallels to like the fight that people go through, is really powerful and can help people raise significantly more money than if they were just running a marathon or doing a 5K.
Yeah, I think the storytelling aspect is really powerful. We blatantly ripped off one of your social media techniques of basically.
Well, I guess because I'm on the board, that's okay.
But I loved it because I just happened to click through the Haymakers for Hope Instagram story, and I noticed that it was long. When the dots get really little up at the top, and you're like, "Oh, this is going to be a lot."
Skip over that.
Exactly, and and so it was one of your fighters, and he basically brought me through his entire day, and I thought it was really interesting. And that day started really early, and he still had to do all of his training and get to work, and talked about why he was doing it, and I thought it was fantastic. We did the exact same thing with Alex Eklund, one of our black belts, in the showcase, and we did it on a day where he specifically was going to Google to teach. He's the jiu-jitsu instructor at the Google headquarters in Manhattan, which was really interesting. And he loved the experience. I know our viewers liked it a lot. We got a lot of positive feedback. So sort of how are you helping them tell the story, and has that impacted how much their experience and your audiences and all of that stuff?
Yeah, so being able to hire someone to like specifically focus on marketing was a big deal for us. And her name is Jordan. She does a fantastic job. She actually fought in one of our events, and then a couple of years later came over to work for us. And a lot of those things that you see are her ideas. And she, because she has the time to really focus on that, she does a great job. I think that we got lucky, and we got like verified on Instagram, so we can do like the swipe up to donate and things like that. But I think a lot of it, is through email, it's through Facebook, it's, through traditional means. I think, her fundraising email is still king. And that, not only are we helping them to storytell, like, when it's like, a day in their life, or we help them with a blog post, we're giving them this opportunity to donate to a place that, like, that they want to, that they're passionate about, not where I'm passionate about. And then like we have different templates that they can look at, and, just really encourage them to be as social as they can be. And then, offer them like different, like ticket packages and things like that. So I think a lot of it is just, having, one of the nice things too is that because, one of the limitations of the business is that we can only have 32 fighters at a time, right? Like we can only have the night can only be so long. We can only, like, as you guys know from doing the black belt thing, you can't have like 200 fights. People just, they get desensitized by it, and they're just like, all right, I'm bored. No matter how compelling the content is. And so, whereas a marathon, you don't get to, if you're organizing a marathon, there's tens of thousands of people. You don't get to know everybody, right? So over the 4 months, we get to know everybody so well. And so we have dialogues with them on a daily basis. And I think that allows us, one, if Dave were to fight, he's Dave in our organization, to us, he's Dave.
Yeah.
He's not number 6,275. And so I think that allows us, and I think the way we think about it is we want to give every single person the best possible experience, because we only have 32 fighters. That means we only have 32 culture carriers and 32 ambassadors. And we need all of those 32 people to tell everyone that they know that this is the best experience they could possibly have, and that their friends and family have to do it, and they have to be a part of it.
Take us back to the first event, because I always remember our event, look back on it fondly, about sort of how low
Oh, it was a
budge.
shit show.
It had to be. So,
Absolute
but
shit
yeah,
show.
I want to
Total
hear
shit
about
show.
that first event.
So it was a total shit show. Even to the day before, we were in the venue, and I was like, "Hey, and this is so ridiculous, but like, there's no flag. How are we going to do the net? We had a national anthem singer, but we didn't have a flag in the venue, and we were so cheap at the time. Where it was like, well, where are we going to get a flag? And it was like, I don't want to pay $30 for a flag. That like, what am I going to do with it afterwards? I live
Right.
in an apartment in New York, so I live at a rented, I'm a subleaser on a month-to-month sublease on an apartment in New York City. What am I going to do with a flag? And so I actually called my high school and talked. It was like the same principal as when I was there, shockingly. And I was like, hey, I hope you remember me. And if I get you the flag, if I grab the flag after school and I bring it back before roll call in the morning, can I use it that night? And they said yes. They're like, yeah,
Very
sure,
nice.
whatever. Very nice of them.
Yes.
But I think, looking back to the first event, we had, it was absolute chaos. We almost got shut down by the police, because we didn't have the right like permitting or whatever it was. And, but it all worked out, right? Like we had, a ton of people put a lot of faith in us. And, I'm forever grateful for all those people. I would go to name them now, but like it would just take a long time. But even like the fighters, like they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They had no idea. We had no track record. The gyms, they believed in us and they believed in the cause and they believed that like what we were trying to do. And look, honestly, like what we were doing wasn't novel, right? Like people had done white collar boxing events before. We were just trying to do it at another scale, at another level, and with a larger percentage of the money going to a good cause. And so, I think that like, it went off. It almost didn't. My brother and sister were very key in that. My partner Julie was key in that. A lot of the gyms, even our first fight, one of the guys didn't have his USA boxing book with him, which was a mistake that we don't let fighters have their books until night of anymore because that happens. So he had to run home. Our second fight got canceled because one of the guys, when the doctors are checking you out before you're fighting, and everyone, normally everyone just goes, oh yeah, sure. Like, the doctor says, do you have any injuries or anything to disclose? And they go, nope, I'm good. Nope, I'm good. This kid was like, actually, I just had mono. And we were like, you had what? And so because he had an enlarged like spleen, the doctor was like, oh, you can't fight, like, because you told me that. And he's like, well, I'm fine. And then he's like, well, no, you told me that. I'm not going to sign off on this. And so then our second fight couldn't happen. So all of a sudden our third fight, which is, these two guys, and we're like, all right, you're on in 5 minutes. They're like, what? Like, so yeah, like, it happened. People like still to this day say how much of a great time they had. And it compelled me at that point, at that time, I just saw like there was something in the room that was just magical, to leave my job. And I left my job within the next month. And I always look at things from the lens of like, what's the worst possible scenario?
Right.
And I thought like the worst possible scenario here was that this fails and I have an awesome story to go to a fancy business school and I can just go back to finance, and the opportunity cost of a few years of lost income is really my worst case scenario, which at the time I was in my mid-20s and single, and I was a cowboy and couldn't have cared less.
Right.
And so that decision matrix would be very, very different now. But so I give John a ton of credit for the decision he made, because I think that he did it, at a much harder part of his life, which I think that,
right.
When people are starting businesses or starting like, whether it's social impact or it's venture or it's tech or it's a family, whatever it is, I think, when you look at like what the person is, why when they're doing it, like, John had kids, he had dependents, he had like all this stuff, and he still decided to do what he did, which I think is, really fantastic, which is part of the reason why I'm more than happy to be on the board. And honestly, I think I would love to help out even more, if John would let us, but he is a cowboy himself and just does things on his own.
No,
so he's moving fast and he's breaking shit. So,
I'm trying.
What are you gonna
do? So,
yeah.
I mean, so yeah, you left your job a month after the first event. I waited 7 years because it was a different
Yeah,
time in my life, and we had to build this thing up in a way that I could make it as sort of a seamless transition as possible. So I think it's definitely a misconception, especially when people are younger, feeling like, well, I need to, have all of this experience, whether it's in the nonprofit world, outside of the nonprofit world, doing something, and then, when I'm in my 30s or 40s, that's when I can, make the leap to the nonprofit world or do my own thing. But the younger, the better, almost. There's
I
less
think so. I mean,
risk. You can always
there's
go
less
find a
risk, and like,
job.
well, and honestly, like let's put it this, like if tap cancer out failed tomorrow, like it's a lot harder for you to get a job as someone in their mid 30s who has a lot of, yeah, you have a lot of experience, but a lot of companies are like pyramids, right? And so there's just less available jobs at
Right.
the level
Yep.
that you're
Yep.
looking to go into. And so it's just going to take you longer than if you're just like 24 and you're like, oh, I can just go into an analyst program.
Mm-hmm.
So you seemed like you started off, on a big scale right from the first event, and you're in 3 cities now, right? Boston, New York City, and Denver, and
And we're actually adding DC this year.
DC.
So I'm actually going to be there on Tuesday
Awesome.
to welcome our first crew. So yeah, and you can ask me like the next question is always like, why did you pick those cities? The joke that I say is that they are the four biggest places for lax bros in the country.
Yeah.
That is true.
So do you have plans to do some future cities, or are these kind of like going to be the
No,
four?
there's no more Laxboro cities, so we're
Yeah.
pretty much done. No, I'm
Yeah.
just kidding. Yeah, I think that, yes, we do have plans to go into, multiple cities. I think what Denver proved and what it's proving in its second year is that this works in any city, whether it be, a Pittsburgh, Philly, or Minneapolis, or LA, San Francisco. This works anywhere. And so, I think that what we're trying to do is, really build like almost like a quote unquote suite of tools and like a suite of ways that you can fundraise for Haymakers for Hope, so that when we do launch in a city, it's not just with 32 culture carriers, it's with like 200. So whether that's through marathon bibs or workout challenges or through the programming that we're doing, like that's kind of how we're trying to build and build scale that way.
So the same question we have for all of our guests is, what is that one thing you wish you knew before you started Haymakers for Hope?
So if I were to look back and, with the different life experiences that I've had, the answer that I would probably say, and this, I don't know if this is cliche or if this is, kind of a weird answer, but I wish I knew myself. I don't think I had any fucking clue who I was when I was like 26, 27 years old, or 25, 26. And, so much has changed. So much has changed me. And I feel like I'm much more comfortable in my own skin. I'm much more, I'm really happy with everything. And I know where I want the business to go. I know how I want that to impact my life. And, just knowing myself and knowing then how to, manage people and manage the business and manage, your family. I think, knowing who you are and what you want out of things and being able to ask yourself those tough questions and have a real answer, allows you to be a much better leader and a much better person and just a much better, even businessman or woman.
I think you'll probably just be a businessman, but
Yeah.
So your next event, by the time this airs, it'll be just a couple weeks before Boston, right? On May 15th.
Yeah, so May 15th, it's actually been sold out for like 6 weeks.
Of course.
And then we have an event in Denver there are still tickets for sale on June 6th. And then we kind of take a break, not a break, but like it's actually a super busy summer, but we don't have any like actual events until September, when we have our first DC event in September. And then we have our all women's event in Boston, which is the Bells of the Brawl in October. And then our kind of like our biggest event, which is our last event, a week before Thanksgiving, which is our New York event.
Will you bring those all women cards to other cities too?
I don't know. People ask us that all the time. It just so happened that for some reason, and I have my own personal theories as to why, but like we have a ton of women signing up in Boston, and we don't have the numbers of women signing up in other cities.
That's
Yeah.
the home base there, right?
Yeah, I guess it's home base. I think that I think it's a little easier. I think in New York, like, New York is like the city, and I think that a lot of, Boston, the suburbs are much more approachable than they are in New York. So you have a lot of people who, um, it's easier for women maybe to get around and things like that. I don't know. There's just we just have a ton of women, and then it's built up. It's like its own thing. Um, so the answer is maybe. I actually have a woman in New York who I'm actually working with to grow our base of women in New York, and then in Denver we actually are getting more and more. So there's definitely potential to do that. I do like having two events in the same city because we can have kind of like two crescendos of event cycles. So it's not like, oh, hey, we just did this thing in a city, and then we'll see in 6 months before we can kind of build it up again.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to have content that's flowing throughout the year.
Definitely.
So I want you to flex your fundraising muscles here a little bit. Well, what number are you
Okay.
at right now for Boston? And is there ever a goal? Do you have like a goal you're all trying to hit
Yeah, so
as a
we're
group?
hoping. So we raised like I think it was 707 last year, 708,
Okay.
and we're looking to do 750 this year. So I think we're in the mid sixes right now with 2 weeks to go, and we'll see a lot of donations coming through. It also
Of course.
doesn't count the sponsorships and stuff that like from corporate that hasn't come through yet. Like we haven't gotten the actual check.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't count matching gifts, things like that. So I think we'll get there. In Denver, we're looking to do 300. We did 220 last year. In New York, we did 1.2 million. So, I guess 1.5 is the goal. And overall, I think we will love to be between 3 and 4 million this year, with the goal of hopefully getting to $10 million raised per year in the next few years.
And that's about where your total's at right now.
We're actually close to 11 right now. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's incredible, Andrew. What you've built here is super impressive. I definitely look up to you as a social entrepreneur and your organization as well, and definitely try to emulate all the good things that you do and try to steal as much trade secrets as I can for Tap Cancer Out to sort of fuel our success too. But I appreciate everything you've done. Certainly for Haymakers for Hope, but also for Tap Cancer Out as well. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks. It was great talking to you,
Thank
Andrew.
All right. See you guys.